A vortex of storm clouds spiraled above, dark and menacing, as a brilliant bolt of lightning tore through the sky. The bolt glowed with a bluish-white intensity, crackling with raw power. Jagged arcs of energy danced violently through the air, illuminating the clouds with flashes of electric fury before slamming into the earth. At the point of impact stood a lone figure, a broad-shouldered man with cropped hair, unmoved by the chaos around him. Rain drenched his muscular frame, but his stern gaze remained locked ahead. The cracked earth beneath his feet and the shock waves pulsing from his stance made it clear. This was no ordinary warrior. He was Dan Wusung, the man known to all simply as the Fist King, a title earned, not given, a name spoken across the Jianghu in both reverence and fear. Few knew his real name. Most only knew the power of his fists. Dan, injured, stood surrounded by bodies, signs of a brutal ambush. His sharp eyes narrowed as he assessed the remaining threats. Just two figures remained. One stood tall with long black hair tied behind him, dressed in shadowy garments that radiated quiet menace. The other wore a white and purple robe, gently waving a traditional folding fan, exuding a calm, calculating air. Dan muttered to himself, noting that they both looked highly skilled and unfamiliar. Dan kicked the man near him back toward his allies, stating that he was returning their subordinate. The man cried out as he was launched to one of the two remaining enemies. "Sword demon! Please, help me!" Without hesitation, the man known as Sword Demon drew his blade and sliced the man in half, silencing him instantly. Dan noted the sheer brutality. The man had cut down his own ally. He didn't hesitate. The symbol engraved on his blade and the ruthless display of violence left little doubt in Dan's mind. These two were members of the demonic faction. Dan called them out, his voice calm but firm. Sword Demon merely smirked, expressing his admiration for how long the Fist King had lasted. He even said the title was well-deserved. Dan didn't entertain the flattery. He warned them instead, with conviction, that he would end this in 10 strikes. Sword Demon laughed at the arrogance and rushed forward to meet him in battle. As the wind howled around them, Dan raised his lightning-wreathed hand and launched into the fight. The storm above seemed to echo each of his strikes. 1, 2, 3. With each number, a blow landed. Sword Demon reeled under the barrage, but something was off. By the 9th blow, Dan paused. Something felt wrong. His fists were powerful, yet every strike missed the enemy's most vulnerable points. He realized that some unseen force was restraining him. His senses honed in on the distant cliffs. There, standing above the battlefield, was the other man. The one with the fan. Surrounded by glowing violet energy, he watched calmly, his posture betraying a quiet confidence. Dan gritted his teeth. That man was interfering, somehow. Before Dan could react further, Sword Demon took advantage of the distraction. He hurled his blade forward. The sword pierced Dan's body, making him spew blood on his mouth. Sword Demon declared that the era of the Fist King was over. But Dan didn't fall. With the sword still embedded in his body, he forced himself forward, breaking through the mystical restraint and landing a crushing punch on Sword Demon's face. But it only grazed the Sword Demon on his face. A cut opened on his cheek, but instead of despair, the man only laughed. "You really are good at fighting, Fist King," he admitted with twisted admiration. The man with the fan descended from the cliff and commented on how close that had been. Sword Demon responded sarcastically, blaming the fan wielder for the lapse in restraint. Approaching Dan again, Sword Demon tried to deliver one last mocking remark. But before he could finish, Dan's fist struck once more, his 10th blow. Blood spewed from Sword Demon's mouth as he collapsed. Dan, now gravely injured, whispered his final thoughts. His strength was gone. He had fulfilled his promise. 10 strikes. But still, he wished for just one more. With that, Dan Wusung, the Fist King, collapsed and died at the hands of the demonic faction. Elsewhere, lightning erupted once more. In a remote location known as the Juhua Mountains Safe House, a blast of electric blue energy surged from the earth. A figure inside a nearby building, clad in yellow robes, looked up in alarm. The shock had not gone unnoticed. Inside, a young woman rushed to the side of a man awakening in bed. She called out anxiously, asking if he was all right. Dan Wusung opened his eyes, disoriented. He glanced around the room, confusion in his gaze. He muttered, "Where am I? Did someone treat me?" He sat up, murmuring to himself. There were no wounds. None of the injuries from the battle remained. Unsure if someone had treated him, the young woman offered him water, addressed him as First Young Master, confused. That wasn't a title he recognized. As he glanced into a nearby mirror, Dan's expression darkened. Startled, he spat the water across the room. "Who put a mask on my face?" he muttered. But as he touched his skin, there were no seams, no edges. This wasn't a mask. It was his face. Panicked, the attendant fled, promising to fetch the physician. Dan slapped his face in disbelief. Outside, the attendant muttered to herself, shaken by how strange the young master was acting that day. Back in the room, Dan muttered to himself, "It couldn't have been those from the demonic faction. If they could pull off something like this, they would have already taken control over the Zhenghu." Dan began to ask himself a question. Then who is this person? Forcing himself out of bed, he staggered across the room like a newborn fawn. Weak, untrained, useless. On the table, he spotted some documents labeled Unha Merchant Group. That name sounded vaguely familiar. It was a large trading house near Juhua Mountain, one even he had heard of despite never dealing with merchants. The letters were addressed to someone named Lee Jin-eon, the eldest son. Reading through them, Dan realized they were filled with requests for money, invitations to gamble, and suggestive letters from women. This body's owner was a complete loser. His thoughts churned. This wasn't sorcery, nor illusion. There was no strange energy in his body. Then came the confirmation. The woman had called him First Young Master. He was inhabiting Lee Jin-eon's body. Then a realization struck. Could it be reincarnation? Before he could reflect further, a man burst into the room, Gongsun Myung, the household physician. The man expressed concern over Dan's behavior. Dan, now Lee Jin-eon, brushed him off. Gongsun insisted he had brought Jin-eon's favorite meal, chicken soup. But when the bowl arrived, Dan narrowed his eyes. Dragon and phoenix soup. To the healthy, it was a nourishing dish. But to someone as frail as the original Lee Jin-eon, it was poison. Dan noted how the physician had subtly tried to take his pulse earlier. Suspicious. Too suspicious. He played along, asking how long the Dragon Phoenix martial competition had been running. About 200 years, the physician answered casually. Dan's expression darkened. That meant not much time had passed since his death. The demonic faction could still be alive. He waved the man away, feigning exhaustion. Gongsun hesitated but obeyed. Now alone, Dan looked around once more. He was surrounded by liars, deceivers, and snakes. The demonic faction still lingered like a shadow across the land. But this time he'd finish the job. "One punch," he muttered darkly. "That's all it'll take this time." A meticulously prepared breakfast sat atop a low wooden table. Grilled skewers, a mix of seasoned meats. A bowl of perfectly steamed white rice emitted faint wisps of steam, and beside it, a delicate porcelain cup cradled a warm, fragrant tea. The entire arrangement felt ceremonial, exuding tradition and calm precision. One of the servants, clearly impressed, let out a breathy exclamation. "Wow," she whispered, her eyes wide. She turned to her companion and remarked, almost in disbelief, that the young master had taken to eating full meals again. Just recently, he had only been able to stomach porridge. Her fellow servant chuckled softly and nodded. "Yes," she agreed. "He's been eating with such appetite lately. He should be back from his morning walk any moment now." Right on cue, Lee Jinian, formerly Dan Woo-sung, entered the room shirtless, a light sheen of sweat glistening on his muscular frame. His breathing was calm but heavy, like someone who had just finished a rigorous training session. He glanced at the table and gave a nod of approval. "Oh, breakfast is already prepared?" he asked casually. The servants bowed silently in confirmation. "Well done," he said. "Keep breakfast simple like this from now on." "Yes, sir," one of them replied dutifully. As Lee Jinian slipped on a fresh robe, the servants exchanged hushed whispers behind him. "He really does seem healthier," one murmured. "I know, right?" the other whispered back with a giggle. Just then, a soft knock interrupted the moment. One of the servants turned and informed the young master that physician Gongsun Myung had arrived to visit. Lee Jinian, his expression tightening slightly, before giving a curt nod. "Let him in." As Gongsun Myung entered the room, muttered under his breath, "He's so rude," Gongsun Myung with his usual exaggerated enthusiasm. "Sir," he exclaimed, arms open as though greeting a long-lost friend. Lee Jinian's lips curled into a restrained smirk as he muttered privately, "I still don't understand why he grovels like that." He narrowed his eyes in amusement. "Shall I try catching this little rat today?" Adopting a more composed tone, he addressed the physician directly. "What brings you here, Physician Gongsun?" Feigning innocence, Gongsun replied, "What do you mean, sir? I hadn't heard anything from you, and I couldn't endure the loneliness. So I came. But I must say, your complexion, it's completely different now. All the effort I put in feels pointless now." Lee Jinian raised a brow. "Effort? You mean your little trick with the dragon phoenix soup?" Gongsun's eyes widened. "Sir, I believe there's been some misunderstanding. The dragon phoenix soup is a nourishing tonic, nothing more." "Oh, really?" Lee Jinian said with a mock tone. "I thought it was poison." Gongsun stiffened. "What?" "Sir, I am Gongsun Myung, your personal physician. If I'm not welcome here," he added with a slight bow, "then I'll take my leave." Lee Jinian narrowed his eyes. "You came without being called, and now you leave without being dismissed?" His voice carried a chill. "Are you the master here, not me?" Gongsun flinched at the sharpness of the retort. But then Lee Jinian laughed, his tone suddenly light. "Ha ha, I'm just joking." Gongsun let out a sheepish chuckle. "Ah, ha ha." Then Lee Jinian issued a sharp order. "I need to send a letter. Bring me writing tools from the desk." "Yes, sir. I'll do that," Gongsun replied as he complied. "I'll dictate. You write," Lee Jinian continued. Gongsun nodded. "Yes, please begin." Lee Jinian began his message with a deceptively calm tone. "Due to Sir Lee Jinian's severe illness, I must remain in the villa for some time. Since this life of mine is so stubbornly long, please advise on what I should do next." As the words sank in, Gongsun froze. His expression darkened. "What's wrong?" Lee Jinian asked coldly. "Why aren't you writing it down?" Gongsun struggled for words. "Sir, what are you saying?" Without warning, Lee Jinian hurled a wooden chopstick. It shot past Gongsun's face and embedded itself in the wall behind him, mere inches from his throat. "Hey, old man," Lee Jinian said, his tone now devoid of humor. I'm not the Lee Jinion of the past anymore. Gongsun leans back, clearly shaken. Sir, what on earth do you mean? Lee Jinion calmly, but his words carried weight. First, about that dragon phoenix soup. To a healthy man, sure, it's a tonic. But to someone as ill as me, it's poison. And you, as a physician, know that well. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you checking my pulse secretly when I didn't die? His voice dropped. And most importantly, you couldn't even hide your intent to kill me. Gongsun's mask of civility finally cracked. His eyes narrowed. Lee Jinion remained seated, his posture casual yet unyielding. You're clearly not acting alone. Write down the name of the one who gave you orders. Gongsun looked away. Why are you doing this, sir? How could you suspect a kind man like me? He let out a breath. Sigh. Gongsun's demeanor changed. His voice turned cold. Even a scoundrel like you has a conscience, huh? Lee Jinion responds. You finally show your true colors. Gongsun, he sneered. I was trying to let you pass with dignity. How foolish. Now there's no other way. If I have to, I'll kill all the servants and silence them. Gongsun muttered. His hand reached for a hidden weapon beneath his clothes, but he wasn't fast enough. In one clean, brutal motion, Lee Jinion struck his head, ending the treachery with a single blow. Don't get distracted while I'm talking, he muttered, standing over the corpse. Continuing his meal, Lee Jinion grimaced. To think I'm in this much pain. What a pitiful body this is. He looked down at Gongsun's lifeless form. I need to recover my strength quickly, he whispered to himself. Once I do, it won't matter if the mastermind is the entire Yonha merchant group. When I return to the group, I'll dig deeper into Gongsun Myung's connections. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his skull. He clutched his head as memories surged forth. Not his own, but those of the original Lee Jin-eon. The flood of images brought clarity and sorrow. So that's what it was, he murmured, tears falling. Lee Jin-eon, the firstborn of the influential Yunha merchant group, had not been gifted. Neither as intelligent as his second brother, nor as strong as the third. He was simply lacking. To mask his inadequacies, he buried himself in a life of luxury, spending frivolously and seeking comfort in vice. But when he finally realized the damage he had done to his name, his health, his family, it was already too late. They had sent him here, to this remote villa, to die in exile. If these memories are right, Lee Jinion muttered, then the main family wouldn't care what happens to me here. At first, the problem was that I had reincarnated without access to this body's past. But now, I can finally focus on martial arts again. He looked down at his own hands. To think he wasted such an innately gifted body. With my knowledge from my previous life, and a few rare elixirs, I can climb to the top again. He turned his eyes to a pouch filled with coins. And money won't be a problem either. His gaze drifted briefly to Gongsun's corpse. I should bury that, he muttered. 1 year later, Juhua Mountain Safe House. A young man in uniform approached the villa gates, a formal letter clutched in hand. His steps were steady, but his eyes darted around with confidence. Hello, he called to one of the servants. I have a letter for young Master Lee Jin-eon. Where can I find him? The servant replied casually. Oh, he's right over there. The man, Mok In Siop, part of the Yunha merchant group's personal guard squad, turned to follow her gaze. And when he saw the figure beyond the courtyard, his breath caught in his throat. That's... he stammered. Young Master Lee Jin-eon. A few seasons had passed. In that time, Lee Jin-eon's energy core had manifested. He had carved into his body the martial techniques essential for survival, the enlightened mobility art, the enlightened body art, and the rapid stride. Most significantly, he had begun mastering a lightning-based technique, the White Lightning 10-phase art, of which he had reached the 4th phase. Everything had progressed smoothly. Seated cross-legged in a lotus position, Jinyan concentrated deeply. But despite the progress, as he executed a technique, a single thought echoed in his mind. It still wasn't enough. Just then, a voice broke through his focus. Mok In-seop had arrived and respectfully greeted him. "It's been a long time," he said. "I'm Mok In-seop of the guard squad. I've brought a letter from the main clan." Jinyan acknowledged him with a nod and asked to see the letter. Even as he handed it over, Mok In-seop remained stunned. Internally, he questioned what he was seeing. Was this really the same fragile young master he had once known? Jinyan looked nothing like the frail figure from before. As Jinyan accepted the letter, he muttered with slight irritation that his arm was about to fall off. The contents of the letter were brief, yet heavy. The head of the Yunha merchant group, his father, had collapsed and was now bedridden. No explanation had been provided for the sudden illness. Leadership of the group was to be passed to Jinyan. Reading aloud, Jinyan echoed the words. "Father has collapsed and is now bedridden, but there's no explanation." In-seop hesitated before responding. He speculated that the Ouyang clan might be behind it. The group had long demanded protection fees disguised as tributes. These fees had grown intolerable. Jinyan asked calmly if the Ouyang clan had done anything to warrant increasing those fees. In-seop, visibly agitated, declared that they hadn't. His anger bubbled over as he described how the Ouyang clan ignored requests for discussion, even when the little deity sect attempted to impose outrageous trade taxes. Their answer was always the same. They only dealt with the Yuna merchant group's main clan, and even then, did nothing. The guard captain hadn't dared protest, not against someone like Ouyang Hu. Jinyan repeated the name thoughtfully. Ouyang Hu. He had heard of the man. He was a powerful figure in the Jianghu, enough for even Jinyan to recognize. He guessed that someone like Ouyang Hu considered merchant groups beneath him. Then he smirked and asked, "So if I take care of the Ouyang clan, this problem goes away?" In-seop was taken aback by the bold suggestion. But he quickly added that there was another critical reason behind the merchant leader's collapse. A sword fight had erupted between the second and third sons, Jinyan's younger brothers. Their father had witnessed the scene and collapsed, likely from anger. Jinyan couldn't believe it. They fought in front of him? A sword fight, no less? He sighed deeply. In-seop tried to reassure him that he wouldn't be held responsible. But Jinyan shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I can't just sit by and watch." He handed the letter back and stood. "I'll go myself." Back at headquarters, Mok In-seop recounted everything to his fellow guards. He insisted that Jinyan had completely changed, that he was now a true martial artist. His colleagues erupted into laughter, mocking the idea. They scoffed at the notion, claiming it was more believable that Jinyan had mastered bedroom techniques than martial ones. But then, silence fell. Han Yeop, the vice captain of the guard squad, loomed behind one of the loudmouths. His expression was unreadable as he confirmed that Jinyan had indeed regained his health. Han Yeop reflected aloud. Jinyan had always possessed a fine physique as a child. He recalled the times he personally taught the young master martial arts. Curious, he asked In-seop when Jinyan planned to return. In-seop admitted he didn't know, only that Jinyan was on his way. As if on cue, someone shouted from outside the gates. "Young Master Jinyan has arrived," In-seop muttered. "Which is now, I guess." Han Yeop immediately ordered the others to prepare a formal greeting. One guard grumbled, questioning whether they really had to bow to someone like Jin Yeon. Han Yeop quickly reminded him who paid their salaries and told him to stop whining. Standing outside the massive estate, Jin Yeon took in the scale of the Yuna merchant group with awe. It was more than he had imagined. He realized the original Lee Jin Yeon hadn't just been well off. He'd been born with a silver spoon. He told his two servants to rest while he went to see his father. They bowed respectfully and obeyed. As he walked deeper into the compound, Jin Yeon wondered why no one had yet greeted him. But suddenly, guards emerged and bowed with reverence. "Congratulations on your safe return, young Master Jin Yeon." Han Yeop stepped forward, bowing. "I am the guard squad's vice captain, Han Yeop. You're almost unrecognizable, sir. I'm relieved to see you healthy." One guard muttered under his breath, calling Han Yeop shameless. He couldn't believe the vice captain was showing respect to someone who had always looked down on him. Jin Yeon, smiling, replied enthusiastically, quite the warm welcome for a troublemaker. "Thank you, everyone." The guards were stunned. He greeted us? They whispered in disbelief. That good-for-nothing actually greeted us? In Seop beamed. "I told you he's changed." Even the most skeptical guard admitted he felt like he was looking at a stranger, someone who felt more like an ally than an enemy. Han Yeop's face softened with a mix of pride and relief. He led Jin Yeon toward the merchant leader's residence. "I already informed your father you'd be visiting," he said. Jin Yeon nodded and thanked him. But as they walked, a mocking voice interrupted. Well, well, look who it is. If it isn't the perverted Jin Yeon." It was Lee Jae-yeon, the third son. Jae-yeon examined his older brother and noted how different he looked. Even his expression had changed. Placing a firm hand on Jin Yeon's shoulder, he sneered. Han Yeop's eyes widened with concern. He recalled how Jae-yeon used to beat Jin Yeon mercilessly. Hoping to defuse the situation, he quickly intervened, pulling Jae-yeon's hand away. "You two must be thrilled to see each other again," he said diplomatically. Jae-yeon was far from pleased. He slapped Han Yeop's hand away and lashed out, furious that he'd been touched without permission. "As if dealing with this good-for-nothing wasn't enough. Now you're disrespecting me too?" Before the situation could escalate, Jin Yeon calmly called Jae-yeon's name. With a soft gesture, he placed a hand on his younger brother's face, almost as if to caress him. Jae-yeon looked confused. "What is—" Before he could finish, Jin Yeon landed a clean punch to his face, sending blood flying. Han Yeop stared in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Jae-yeon sat on the ground, dazed. What the hell?" Jin Yeon remained composed. "Jae-yeon," he said with a grin. "I was so excited on my way here." Then, gripping Jae-yeon's shoulder tightly, he squeezed until his younger brother screamed in pain. "You insane bastard!" Jae-yeon shouted. Jin Yeon leaned in with a smirk. "Insane bastard? You should be calling me Big Brother." Meanwhile, a slight commotion stirred within the halls. At the back, a man holding scrolls paused, his brow furrowing as he muttered to himself, "That's Father's room." The man was Lee Hwa-yeon, second son of the Yunha merchant group and its current overseer. Approaching Han Yeop, Hwa-yeon asked with authority, "What is all this ruckus?" Han Yeop turned, replying, "Ah, overseer. There was an argument between the first and third young masters." Hwa-yeon's expression darkened. He muttered in frustration, "The third must have harassed him again. And what are you all doing just standing around instead of stopping them?" With urgency he added, "My older brother," and rushed forward toward the source of the disturbance. Inside, Jin Yeon maintained a stern tone as he addressed Jae-yeon. "Be quiet. We're right in front of Father's room." He glanced back as Hwa-yeon entered. Is that you, Hwa-yeon?" Huaiyan, caught off guard by Jinyan's commanding presence, could only respond with a confused, Soon, the three brothers were gathered inside the room. Huaiyan sat sipping tea, Jinyan stood before Jaeyan, and Jaeyan knelt on the ground, arms raised in punishment. "I heard that you returned," Huaiyan said, eyeing his elder brother. "You seem like you're in good health." "I'm fine now," Jinyan replied casually. He then noticed an injury on Huaiyan's hand and asked, "Did the third do that to you?" "Ah, it's not serious," Huaiyan began. But before he could finish, Jinyan delivered a sharp slap to Jaeyan's face. "You shouldn't wield a sword against your older brother," Jinyan said coldly. "Unless you wanna—" Jaeyan, stunned, quickly responded, "Okay." When Jinyan raised an eyebrow, Jaeyan stammered, I understand." As he processed what had just happened, Jaeyan muttered under his breath, still in disbelief, "Li Jinyan beat me up. He used to be so weak." Huaiyan, equally astonished, murmured, "He really humbled Jaeyan." He remembered how Jinyan could barely avoid a beating in the past. With curiosity, Huaiyan asked, "Did something happen at the safe house? You seem like a completely different person." "Is that so?" Jinyan responded with a slight smirk. "You've got a good eye." He then turned his attention to the scrolls and asked, "What's all this?" "That's the list of employees I'm taking to the conference tomorrow," Huaiyan explained. Jinyan glanced through the names and muttered, "A list of employees. I was curious who recommended Gongsun Myung, but I guess that's not needed anymore." As his gaze narrowed, he added, "The person who brought in all these people, from the vice guard squad leader to the front gate guards, it's Ouyang Hu." His tone shifted, colder and sharper now. "If either of you is working with the Ouyang clan," he warned, "now's the time to speak." Huaiyan immediately retorted, "Do you really think that's even possible?" Jaeyan, equally defensive, exclaimed, Yeah, that's ridiculous. I'd rather die than see another clan take over our business." Huaiyan nodded firmly. "That's right. The Yuna Merchant Group is something father built with his own hands." Jinyan exhaled in relief. "I'm glad to hear that," he muttered to himself. "At least I won't need to kill them." He rose to his feet. "Are all the higher-ups attending the conference tomorrow?" "Yes," Huaiyan confirmed, still unsettled by the change in his brother. "Good," Jinyan said. "Then I'll attend too." Without another word, he left the room. "Huh? Where are you going?" Huaiyan called after him. "To see father," Jinyan answered, already gone. Staring at the doorway, Huaiyan murmured, "What happened at the safe house?" Jaeyan, meanwhile, was practically throwing a tantrum. "I should have gone to Juhua Mountain. Me! Ah!" At their father's chamber, a voice outside the door called, "Merchant Group Leader, the eldest son is here." "Let him in," the old man replied. Jinyan entered. His father, Lee Seong-min, leader of the Yuna Merchant Group, greeted him with a weak voice. "You're here. What was all that noise outside?" he asked. Jinyan waved it off. "Nothing important. I heard you're unwell, due to stress." "Yes," Seong-min replied with a sigh. "I've always been under stress, but now this old body just can't handle it anymore." He reached out and gently touched Jinyan's face. "You've changed a lot. For the better," he said with a soft smile. "Your face looks different. Are you really Jinyan?" Jinyan simply nodded. "Yes." Internally, however, he was caught in his own thoughts. Strange. I grew up without parents, so I never knew what having a father felt like. But in Lee Jinyan's memories, his father was a great man. As he held his father's frail hands, he muttered, "When did he become so small?" Out loud, he promised, "Father, don't worry. We just need to eliminate the cause of your stress. I'll handle that, so please, don't worry. Eliminate? The old man asked, concerned. Ah. Jinyon forced a smile. It's nothing. Don't worry. The following day, the Yunha Merchant Group's conference began. Among the attendees was Ouyang Hu, guard squad leader and a martial master from the Ouyang clan. A subordinate leaned over and whispered, "Guard squad leader. Isn't that the eldest son? What's he doing here?" Ouyang Hu smirked. He must be worried about his position in the group. During the meeting, Huaiyan continued discussing business. So, does anyone have a different opinion? If not, I'll move on to… I do, Ouyang interrupted confidently. I heard the first young master still doesn't have a guard, despite returning. I'd like to make a recommendation. Murmurs spread through the room. One man whispered, "Half the group's already under the Ouyang clan." Another replied, "Hey," only to have his teacup swatted away by Ouyang Hu. "Oops, my hand slipped," Ouyang said mockingly. "My bad. Anyone have anything to say about my suggestion?" When the room remained silent, he sneered. "Thought so." Jinyon stood up. "I do. I have complaints." As he stepped forward, all eyes turned to him. "I'd like to make a suggestion too," he said, his tone sharpening. "A suggestion. To fire the guard squad leader, Ouyang Hu." Gasps filled the room. The Yunha members were stunned. The Ouyang representatives burst into laughter. One man chuckled. "Goodness, what a joke." Another added, "Doesn't he know how much the squad leader's done for the group's security?" "Fire me?" Ouyang Hu laughed loudly. "You must have forgotten how things work after lying bedridden so long. That's not something you get a say in." Jinyon's expression hardened. "Is that so?" Without warning, he punched the floor, sending a ripple of force that silenced the room. "You must have forgotten. Just because you've gained some influence," Jinyon said coldly. Ouyang's confident smirk vanished. "But let me remind you." Jinyon's voice cut like a blade. "The Yuna Merchant Group belongs to me." Before the assembly, Li Huaiyan glanced nervously at Li Jinyon and asked why he was present. "Are you really planning to dismiss Guard Captain Ouyang Hu? That's why you came? Honestly, we're just a merchant group. It's above our pay grade to confront someone like him." Jinyon fixed Huaiyan with a steady gaze. "Huaiyan, do you realize what happens when a martial artist from the Jianghu is underestimated? The ignorant ones get devoured. Look at our merchant group. It's being eaten alive right now." Inwardly, Huaiyan thought, "He's right. When did the Ouyang clan grow so powerful here?" Jinyon placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and smiled. "But don't worry, I, your older brother, will handle it," Han Yup murmured skeptically. "Handle it? Like that, brother?" Ouyang's subordinate rushes forward drew their sword. Ouyang shouted, "Young Master Jinyon, what madness is this?" Ouyang Hu hissed to himself, "That troublemaker, has he lost his mind?" Captain Han Yeop quickly intervened. "Insolent! How dare you brandish a sword at young Master Jinyon? Step back at once." Jinyon's expression darkened. "You're right. That was truly insolent. Drawing a sword on your employer? You young punks really have a death wish. Since I feel a little sorry for Ouyang, maybe I'll consider this compensation." Ouyang scowled. "Feel sorry?" Jinyon continued, stepping closer. "You ruined his retirement plans. You had Gongsun Myung try to assassinate me while I was recovering, and you provoked a feud between my second and third brothers. Blood between siblings makes your work easier, and thanks to you, Father collapsed. Had you manipulated one of my brothers, you could have taken over the Yunha Merchant Group without lifting a finger." Ouyang sneered loudly. "Ha! Young Master Jin-sun? That's pure delusion." Jinyon rested a calm hand on Ouyang's shoulder. "But then, Gongsun Myung, who was supposed to kill me, died by my hand instead. Ouyang's face turned grim. Gongsun Myung died at your hand? Jinyeon turned away casually. Don't be too sad. I sent him off with a single strike. If you wanted to consume a major merchant group, you should have tried harder. Oh, and I'll be filing claims for all the damage you caused. Ouyang shook with rage. You arrogant brat! Jinyeon glanced back over his shoulder. Got you. As Ouyang lunged, Jinyeon readied himself. Their auras clashed with a thunderous gust that swept through the hall. Gasps echoed. Lightning energy? He knows martial arts? Young Master Jinyeon blocked the captain's strike? Jinyeon winced dramatically. Ouch! Is it okay to hit someone who just recovered? He smirked. Maybe it's fine, since this is an official duel. Ouyang hissed back, venom in his voice. That arrogant fool. He's as cocky as a chick who just learned to fly. He shouted to onlookers. Guard squad! Ouyang clan. Witnesses. Since young Master Jinyeon agrees, we shall have an official duel. Happy now? Jinyeon bowed into a fighting stance. Life or death duel. Gasps filled the room. Ouyang drew his sword. Young Master Jinyeon, you must have trained under an impressive sect. Your skills are decent in such a short time. But you lack experience, and I'll ensure you understand the difference. He leapt forward. Jinyeon dodged effortlessly. Experience, he taunted, then charged with lightning aura. You're 100 years too early for this, punk. Ouyang was thrown back. What? Is this strength? He muttered. Jinyeon advanced with deadly calm. Let me show you the true difference experience makes, he declared. Using the enlightened mobility art, he struck. Ouyang blocked but struggled against the rapid assault. Something's off. He's not a novice, more like a seasoned martial master. Ouyang gasped. Subordinates whispered in shock. He's going to finish him! Ouyang shouted and advanced with a three-form sword art. In response, Jinyeon launched rapid stride, closing the gap instantly. Ouyang stammered. When did he get there? Jinyeon delivered a precise blow to his chin, sending him crashing through the roof. Silence fell as dust settled. In Lee Xiongmin's chamber, his attendant peered out in alarm. Merchant group leader, what's happening? Xiongmin responds. My son. It seems he's learned martial arts. Below, Ouyang's subordinates rushed in. One knelt before the fallen Ouyang. Young, Master Jinyeon's duel was fair. I witnessed everything. However, from now on, if the Ouyang clan continues to demand revenge through duels, the Yunhei merchant group will have no way to avoid those. Jinyeon's voice cut in. That's fine. I never expected to escape grudges. If kindness is shown, I'll repay it. If hatred, I'll return it tenfold. And if anyone objects, the consequences are mine alone, not the Yunhei merchant group's. Huaiyan cried out, Brother, that's reckless. But Jinyeon stood resolute. The Yunhei merchant group is mine, and father's. It belongs to the guard squad who welcomed me this morning, and to the stable hands who take joy in simply watching me eat. We refuse to be toyed with by scum like you. If you understand, get lost. You're all dismissed. Han Yeop, Mok In Seop, and the servants beamed with pride. The Ouyang subordinates seethed in defeat. One muttered as they departed. Well then, good luck. Onlookers cheered. Mok In Seop nearly jumped until a guard hushed him. Quiet. Don't celebrate. Be ashamed we let it come to this. But In Seop just smiled. Jinyeon called for Huaiyan. Chief Administrator. Yes, sir? Arrange an elixir for me, said Jinyeon. I promise to shoulder responsibility. At least let me have that support. Of course, Huaiyan answered excitedly. I'll get the finest tonic. Elixir orders, hiring new guards. You'll be busy. Jinyeon mused. Oh, And the new guard squad. I already have candidates. A few days prior, on his first day to the Yunha merchant group, Lee Jinian strode through the grand hall alongside Vice Captain Han Yeop. As they passed by a group of idle Ouyang clan members lounging about, Jinian's gaze sharpened in silent disapproval. He turned to Han Yeop and asked whether the vice captain had eaten yet. Han Yeop replied that he hadn't. He had been working since dawn. Jinian let out a quiet sigh, observing the contrast between the diligent and the indolent. He noted that while some people worked without rest, others squandered their hours loitering. It was clear to him that the ones shirking their duties must have ties to Ouyang clan. Out of frustration, Jinian crushed the nearby railing and declared that such people needed to be purged from the group. But Jinian had already regained his composure. He said the real challenge wasn't identifying the ones to dismiss, but finding capable people to take their place. Then, narrowing his eyes, he remarked quietly to himself that he had just found the right candidates. Later that evening, Jinian arrived at a brightly lit gambling den. The building was filled with raucous laughter, drunken shouting, and flirtatious chatter. As Jinian entered, a guard at the entrance recognized him instantly. The man greeted him with mocking familiarity, joking that the pushover had returned to make another generous donation. Jinian shot him a scornful glance and warned the man not to touch him, lest he get pig grease on himself. Then, with a cold tone, he told him to open the door. The guard, taken aback, began to protest, but Jinian ignored him and pushed forward into the room. In the main chamber, 3 men turned their heads at the sound of his entrance. At the center stood a scar-faced man, Poisonous Fox Chul Myungho, who grinned and welcomed Jinian, commenting that he looked healthier now, and that recovery must have done him good. The other 2 also greeted Jinian, Yuk Jinbo and Yuk Myungbo. They says, "Welcome," and "It's been a while." Myungho laughed and scolded them for not checking in on Jinian during his recovery. Myungbo apologized, claiming they hadn't known. Myungho waved it off but added that he had been bored without a pushover around to swindle. Then, with exaggerated flair, he offered to celebrate Jinian's return to the Bunha merchant group by treating him to something special. But when Jinian didn't respond, Myungho's tone turned mocking. He called out sarcastically, demanding to know why he was so quiet. Jinian, his voice low and measured, responded that he had simply been thinking, specifically about whether he should kill Myungho. He explained calmly that he had no use for someone like him. What he really wanted were the twins. He could tell they were capable, and it was a waste to see them serving under Myungho. Having made up his mind, Jinian declared his decision aloud. Myungho, now agitated, asked if Jinian was even listening to him. But Jinian remained composed. He smiled and asked Myungho to hand over the key to the vault. Shocked, Myungho repeated the words with disbelief. He asked if Jinian was seriously demanding money. Jinian confirmed it without hesitation. He laid out the debt. Thousands of nyang he had been forced to invest into the gambling den. Interest, extortion, and the cost of medical treatment after being beaten. All of it amounted, in his estimate, to a fair total of 100,000 nyang. Myungho burst out laughing. He mocked Jinian, suggesting he must have learned arithmetic during his recovery. Then, rising from his seat, he sneered that the vault contained far more than that. Gold, silver, and jewels included. But none of it belonged to Jinian.
He leaned in closer and said that if Jinian needed money, he should just ask, but he had no intention of handing over the vault key to someone who was supposed to be a frail patient. Jinian gave no reply. Frustrated, Myungho's tone grew hostile. He began yelling, insulting Jinian, and eventually ordered his subordinates to pin him down. One of the twins moved in to grab Jinian, but the young master acted with lightning speed. Ji-neon seized the man's wrist, twisted it effortlessly, and flung him across the room. The second twin lunged in retaliation. Ji-neon dropped low, dodged the attack, and delivered a powerful kick that shattered the twin's ankle. Ji-neon paused for a moment, genuinely surprised. Despite their injuries, both twins slowly stood back up. There was no trace of fear in their eyes. Ji-neon nodded to himself in admiration, muttering that this was exactly the kind of value he had been looking for. The twins begun their attack. Rushes forward toward Ji-neon, but in the blink of an eye, he reappeared between the twins, grabbed them by their heads, and slammed their skulls together with a loud crack. He released them and warned them sternly not to move again. Then he turned his attention back to Chul Myung-go, who stood frozen, visibly shaken. Ji-neon's tone dropped further, his gaze icy cold. It was just the two of them now. Myung-go staggered back. In desperation, he reached behind his back, groping for a hidden knife as he barked out, his voice trembling, that Ji-neon should have at least warned him he was studying martial arts instead of arithmetic during his recovery. Ji-neon merely tilted his head slightly, responding in a calm, yet condescending tone. He said Myung-go was usually quick-witted, so why was he so slow this time? Now visibly nervous, Myung-go gripped the blade behind his back and shouted at Ji-neon not to come any closer. He tried to shift the mood, suggesting they talk it out. But his panic only deepened. He cursed under his breath, muttering that there was no need to be afraid. After all, Ji-neon had always been a pushover. With a sudden burst of aggression, Myung-go charged forward, declaring that the first strike wins. But Ji-neon acted faster. He kicked the table up to intercept the blow, punched clean through the wooden surface, and seized Myung-go by the head. With a cold smirk, he countered, stating that the counter-strike wins, then drove a lightning-fast strike into Myung-go's skull. Myung-go screamed in pain. Outside, the guard from earlier muttered that someone was probably going to die tonight. Ji-neon let Myung-go drop to the ground, telling him to snap out of it. Myung-go laughed bitterly, his breathing ragged, saying he was conscious and asked what Ji-neon wanted now. But his expression darkened, that he began to wonder what Ji-neon had actually been doing during his so-called recovery. Was it training? Was all of this for revenge? He hadn't been that cruel to Ji-neon. Had he? Panic set in as Myung-go scrambled upright, suddenly offering alternatives. He asked if Ji-neon wanted something else instead of the vault key, anything at all. He insisted they'd been friends since childhood and tried to guilt Ji-neon by invoking their past. Ji-neon paused, then agreed. They were friends after all. Relieved, Myung-go leaned in with forced warmth. He claimed this was the right path, pulled Ji-neon into a hug, and promised to stop hitting or bullying him. Ji-neon, disgusted, told him to let go, that it was making him sick. Still grinning, Myung-go escalated the act. He called them real friends now, no brothers. He shouted to the twins across the room to greet their new big brother and congratulate him. Jinbo, reserved, congratulated Ji-neon for getting strong. Myung-bo followed with a quiet congrats. Watching the exchange, Myung-go's smile twitched. Inwardly, he sneered at the idea of friendship or brotherhood. He thought Ji-neon was nothing more than a bootlicker, a tail-wagging coward. Once he got out of this situation, he planned to take the twins and flee. With them, he could easily settle into a new scam somewhere else. Ji-neon then addressed the twins directly, asking if they were truly okay with this. When he called someone his sworn brother, it was for life. Were they ready? The twins hesitated, glancing at Myung-go for a cue. Myung-go, trying to keep the charade alive, told them not to look at him like that. They were sworn brothers now. That seemed to be enough. The twins responded that from now on, they would serve Ji-neon as their big brother. Myung-go tried to regain some energy in the moment, cheered, but Ji-neon suddenly changed his tone. With eerie calm, he said that now that they were brothers, they had to decide who the biggest brother was. He told the twins to step outside. He and Myung-go would settle it and let them know afterward. Myung-go's face turned pale that he stammered, trying to delay the moment, but the twins obeyed and left the room, leaving only Ji-neon and Myung-go. Ji-neon stared at him and asked why he was hesitating. He urged Myung-go to hurry up and decide. Internally, Myungo panicked. He had no idea what Jinion was after. But Jinion kept speaking, shaking his head in disappointment. He told Myungo that exploiting loyal men like the twins was no way to live. From now on, Jinion said he would raise them right, and he smiled brightly, unnervingly. Myungo slumped in defeat that he muttered that Jinion might as well take the money too. Jinion had already beaten him and now was taking the twins. Wasn't that the same as telling him to go die somewhere? He screamed in despair, begging to be killed. Jinion narrowed his eyes and agreed. Without hesitation, he kicked Myungo in the chin and sent him flying. He declared mockingly, "You've worked hard, friend," before unleashing a flurry of brutal blows. Staggered and stunned, Myungo could barely process the assault. He thought to himself, wait, he's actually going to kill me. I'm really going to die. With one last gasp, Myungo raised his trembling hand and choked out a surrender. He would give Jinion the key. Jinion, unimpressed, leaned closer and asked if that was really how someone begging for their life should sound. Through gritted teeth, Myungo tried to stay sarcastic. He asked if he should start talking politely, since they were friends. Jinion's response was to grab him and hurl him across the room. He muttered to himself in disgust, noting how insane Myungo must be to still joke around like that. The twins rushed to Myungo's side, asking if he'd really lost. With shame burning in his chest, Myungo admitted he had. He instructed them to follow Jinion now, that he was their big brother from this point forward. He could barely keep from crying. Humiliation gnawed at him. But deep down, he knew the twins would have a better life in the Yunha merchant group than rotting in this cesspit of a gambling den. One of the twins quietly acknowledged that. The other thanked Myungo for everything. Seeing their sincerity, Myungo raised his head and blinked in disbelief. Then he muttered bitterly under his breath, calling them ungrateful bald bastards. Sometime later, as he trudged out of the building, he was still cursing. He said the elders were right. You should never take in creatures with black hair. As he passed through the gambling hall, whispers followed him. Isn't that walking corpse Chul Myungo? Where are the twins who used to follow him? If they're gone, maybe we can finally beat him. With the twins gone, gamblers began circling him like vultures. Myungo sighed that he muttered that all the rats were finally crawling out of the woodwork. He raised his voice, reminding them who he was, the poisonous fox. If they had the guts, they should come at him. One thug called him a dead man, walking, and shouted for the crowd to kill him. Weapons were drawn. Myungo braced himself, muttering bitterly that this really might be the end. He cursed Jinion one last time. He should have taken it easier on him. But before the mob could strike, Jinion intervened. With one devastating blow, he cleared the room. Jinion sneered at the gamblers. He pointed out how none of them dared look at Myungo before, but now they swarmed because he was weak. He told them to come back when Myungo wasn't half dead, if they had any class at all. Instead of gratitude, Myungo grumbled that Jinion was acting too cool for his own good. He limped away, muttering that the world really was messed up. As Jinion and the twins exited the den, one of them spoke up and thanked him for helping Myungo. The other echoed it. Jinion didn't respond at first. He simply stared ahead and muttered that anyone who had visited this den likely wondered the same thing. Why had the twins followed Chul Myungo? Some said they were bought and sold like slaves. Others believed they feared him. Even Jinion had thought that once. But now, he knew the truth. They were neither slaves nor cowards. He smiled softly and muttered that even in his second life, understanding people's true hearts was never easy. Far in the distance, a figure watched them go. The man squinted, shocked, and whispered to himself, "No way, that's really Jinion."
A few days had passed since Jinion's return to the Yuna merchant group. Jaeon was already losing his mind. There hadn't been a single quiet day since that guy came back. Just the other day, Jinion had randomly returned with a mountain of cash. Then, without warning, he dragged two giant men into the compound like they were lost puppies. Jaeon grumbled, saying he didn't like him, not one bit. And just as he was ranting, he stopped in his tracks. What the hell was that? A large carriage rolled into the compound. Hua Ian calmly told the workers to be careful with it, warning them that it was carrying something important. Jae Eon, curious and wide-eyed, rushed over. He demanded to know what it was, and the moment he got a good look at it, he nearly fainted. That was 100-year tuber fleece flower, the kind people lined up for before sunrise. He asked if it was really that rare item. Before Hua Ian could answer, a calm but commanding voice cut through. Their father said he had ordered it. Jaeyeon stammered. "Father?" Hua-yeon turned toward the old man, worried. He told him it was still too early for him to be outside, but their father insisted he felt much better now. Jaeyeon's mind raced. Why would father go this far? Lee Jinyeon had only asked for one elixir. If he bought so many, then that could only mean... Jaeyeon lit up. He was sure there was one for him too. He turned to his father with hope in his voice. But father shut it down. Every single elixir was for Jinyeon. Jaeyeon's jaw dropped. All of them? Father calmly explained. One elixir alone wouldn't be enough to change their family's fate. Compared to the money they'd already wasted on the Uyang clan and the little deity sect, this wasn't excessive. He had written to all their branch leaders, longtime allies, and top merchants. He told them they were in crisis. If the merchant group fell, they would all lose money, so they'd take it seriously. Father said making Uyang Hu the guard squad captain had been his decision, so it was only right that he take responsibility. Han Yap nodded. He said it was a wise move, that Jinyeon would surely become a great martial artist. Hua Yan agreed, adding that Jinyeon was amazing. Their father thanked them both and said he truly appreciated their support. Han Yap assured him he would give everything he had. But Jaeyeon was still sulking. Father cut him off. He said this was perfect timing. The perfect opportunity to use every bit of wealth he'd earned in his life. Jaeyeon panicked. What about him? Where was his elixir? Father turned to him slowly and asked, did he even need one? Later at the training ground, Jaeyeon trains out of frustration. Everywhere he went, it was Jinyeon this, Jinyeon that. Why didn't he get an elixir? Was everyone just ignoring him now? He cursed under his breath, wondering what kind of damn miracle Jinyeon had stumbled into. Then, from the distance, he heard heavy footsteps. Jinyeon ran past him, with a fucking boulder strapped to his back. Jaeyeon jumped back, confused. He asked what the hell that was supposed to be. Jinyeon answered that he was just out for a walk. Jaeyeon scoffed. A walk? With a fucking boulder? Now the guy who was born lucky was suddenly putting in effort? Jaeyeon collapsed on the ground with his wooden sword, muttering to himself. He tried to mimic the battle he had seen between Jinyeon and Uyang Hu. He acted it out like some kind of scene. He imagined the moment Ouyang Hu slashed down and Jinyeon dashed forward and smashed him in the jaw. It still didn't make sense to him. How did that bastard do it? Just then, a voice cut through. Jinyeon had circled back. He asked who Jaeyeon was calling a beastard. Jaeyeon freaked out. He stuttered, saying he was just talking to himself. Jinyeon said if he was going to analyze movements, he should do it right, then handed over the wooden sword. He even complimented Jaeyeon, saying his recreation of Uyang's sword form was pretty solid. Jaeyeon froze. So Jinyeon had been watching. He followed Jinyeon's instructions, replaying the move. Jinyeon added that Uyang Hu stabbed sloppily. Jaeyeon growled, insulted. He yelled that Jinyeon had a real sharp tongue. Before he could say more, Jinyeon lunged. Jaeyeon barely blocked it. Jinyeon said that after breaking the feint, he had closed the gap. Jaeyeon's thoughts spiraled. What was this lunatic doing? Jinyeon moved behind him in a blur. He tried to kick again, but Jaeyeon dodged just in time. Jinyeon added that once a fighter is cornered, they reveal their hidden trump card. Just as Jaeon turned, Jinyeon was already there, fist raised. The strike stopped just short of his chin. Jaeon trembled. That could have killed him. Jinyeon casually explained that stabbing was less accurate than slashing. He said the sword art Uyang-hu used was meant to kill in one hit, and if someone could move fast enough in that brief moment, the outcome was already decided. In his mind, Jinyeon thought back. If it had been him in his past life, someone like Uyang-hu wouldn't have even gotten to draw his sword, but his current body wasn't even a quarter of what it used to be. He told himself he had no right to be proud. There were fighters he couldn't beat, even as the Fist King. This wasn't enough. He needed to become stronger. Way stronger. A servant arrived. She announced that Jinyeon had a guest waiting. Jinyeon nodded. He said he'd be there soon. Then casually flicked Jaeyeon's forehead. Jaeyeon yelped in pain. He asked why the hell Jinyeon hit him. Jinyeon smirked and said it was because he was a damn bastard. Somewhere else, a group of guys were arguing. One of them said it was nonsense. There was no way Jinyeon knew martial arts. Wasn't that the guy who spent all day chasing girls? Another guy, Gu-ung, insisted it was real. He had seen it himself. One night, drunk, he stumbled past Chul Myung-ho's gambling den. He remembered hearing a voice. It was Jinyeon's, but when he turned around, Jinyeon had vanished. Back in the present, the others still didn't believe him. That's why they had all come here, to see it for themselves. They barged into Jinyeon's room without knocking. What they saw left them stunned. Jinyeon, shirtless, standing there with the twin brothers. They closed the door instantly and turned to the servant in disbelief. They asked if that was really their young master. The servant said yes, that was him. Sima Guk muttered that he must have drunk too much. Gu-ung shook his head. He couldn't believe it. Was that really Lee Jinyeon? From the infamous Playboy 4 Heavenly Kings? Then, Jinyeon opened the door. The three flinched in unison. Jinyeon told Myohyang to take the twins to the dining hall and feed them huge portions. Myohyang obeyed and led them away. Jinyeon turned to the three men. He asked why they were still standing there. He motioned for them to come in. The three stared blankly, and all thought the same thing. Someone, please save us.
They were known as the self-proclaimed 4 heavenly kings of wine and women. Sima Guk, who is the Miram Alliance hope. Ju Jaryong, a man who failed his martial exams more times than he could count, and also had a sensitive stomach. Guang, the youngest heir of the West Wind escort household. And lastly, the infamous heir of the Yunha merchant group, Lee Jinyeon. These 4 made up the group. Now, they all sat together again, brought back by a wild rumor. The rumor that their pushover friend, Jinyeon, had returned. They gathered around a round table, chatting, but in Jinyeon's mind, he let out a sigh. Not these clowns again. He remembered them well. Always hanging out, drinking, talking about women. They called themselves something ridiculous, like the 4 Total Wrecks, or something just as stupid. Ju Jaryong leaned in and asked if he was all right. Jinyeon nodded. Jaryong said he looked intense, more alive than ever. Guang spoke up. He said he still couldn't believe the guy he saw that night was really Jinyeon. Had he trained non-stop in secret? Sima Guk watched in silence. In his heart, he knew you couldn't get this strong with just training. This was martial arts. Real, dangerous martial arts. He asked who taught Jinyeon. There was no way he learned that on his own. Jinyeon said he just got lucky. Sima Guk gasped. So it really was one of those fate-changing encounters you only heard about in the Jianghu. He started to ask something else. Jaryong interrupted. He said it looked like Jinyeon had finally caught a break. He almost didn't recognize him. Jinyeon replied with a low voice. The old Lee Jinyeon was dead. The others stared, confused. Jaryong asked what his plans were now. Jinyeon said there were debts tied to his sect that he had to pay. He'd help out with the merchant group while preparing for that. He wasn't interested in anything else. All he wanted now was to become stronger. The mood turned quiet. Guang whispered, asking what was wrong with him. Had they walked into the wrong house? Jaryang swore it wasn't him. Sima Guk remembered something. Before Jinian went away, he asked if Jinian was really going to recuperate somewhere. Jinian replied it was more like exile. Their father must have been really disappointed. Sima Guk had told him it might be a good thing. A chance to study, to heal, and to change. Jinian said that'd be nice. Back in the present, Sima Guk raised his cup. He said congrats to Jinian. He had truly changed. Jaryang agreed. It was worth celebrating. Guang joked that he knew this would happen. He reminded them that he suggested they should have kidnapped Jinian before he got sent away. Sima Guk teased him. He didn't even show up that day. Guang yelled that he was busy. Sima Guk rolled his eyes. Busy taking a dump, maybe? Guang snapped back, ready to argue. Jinian smiled faintly. Even he had real friends, after all. Then he asked the others. He had changed, but what about them? There was a pause. Sima Guk shrugged. Who knows? Jaryang answered with a grin. If they were the kind to change easily, they wouldn't be them. Jinian sighed and told them to stop talking about it. In Jaryang's mind, a thought stayed. They all used to think they were stuck in a well. But one of them had already climbed out and seen the world. Time passed. Jaryang said he had fun. He told Jinian to call if he ever needed help. Train hard, so he wouldn't get beat up out there. Sima Guk congratulated him again. Then they left, walking through the streets at night. Guang said it was weird. The biggest screw-up among them had returned as a grown man. It almost felt like youth was over. Sima Guk said he felt unusually lonely tonight. Let's go. Jaryang asked where to. A brothel? Sima Guk yelled back. Home, you idiot. Go study. You failed your exam again, didn't you? Jaryang shouted that he wasn't bad at studying. He just sucked at taking tests. Guang grinned. He suggested they swing by Sweet Scent House for one more drink. They entered the Sweet Scent House. Elsewhere inside, the leader of the little deity sect, Yom Jinsang, slammed his table. He roared. Ouyang, who was dead? Was the heir of the Yunhe merchant group really that strong? One of the Ouyang members confirmed it. Jinian crushed the captain in under 30 moves. Jinsang asked what weapon he used. They told him his fists. Jinsang laughed bitterly. A swordsman losing to a fist user? What a disgrace. The Ouyang man asked what they do. Will they take revenge? Jinsang snapped. How could they get revenge for a fair duel? They weren't thugs. The Ouyang members shouted that they were supposed to be friends. There was honor between them. Jinsang sliced his head off without hesitation. He muttered that he didn't befriend corpses. Get that body out of here. Saran, a woman sitting beside him, was frozen. Blood splattered across her face. Jinsang looked at her, startled. He apologized. Said the drink tasted awful now. Let's go. As they walked, he muttered. The Yunhe merchant group refuses to pay taxes. And now they've killed Ouyang Hu. What should they do with that? One of his men said it meant they didn't respect the little deity sect anymore. Jinsang agreed. That was exactly it. He clicked his tongue. Another lackey asked, would he kill them? Jinsang was shocked. They weren't some gang. They couldn't just go around killing people. The lackey asked again. Would he let it go then? Just then, the trio, Guang, Ju Jaryang, and Sima Guk walked into the establishment. They passed right by the little deity sect members. As they crossed paths, Jinsang muttered loudly. He wanted the Yunhe merchant group's money. Sima Guk heard it and paused. The Yunhe merchant group. Jinsang went on. Li Xiangmin, the old man, was a master of deals. There was a rumor he was richer than he let on. It made him wonder, just how much was the young heir worth? Sima Guk rushed out. He ran all the way back to the Yunhe compound. He found Jinian, breathing hard. Jinian yawned and joked. It was touching. Sima Guk really came running back. Sima shouted. The little deity sect looked ready to attack. He said they had no proper guards left. Should they ask Guang for help? Jian stayed quiet. In his mind, he remembered Mok Inseop's warning. Those guys were trying to stab them in the back with Ouyang Hu. He asked where they were now. Sima Guk said probably back at their base. Jian nodded, told them to come inside. Sima Guk was confused. Where were they even going? Jian handed him a uniform, told him to put it on. They were at the guard squad's warehouse. He asked if Sima knew the way to the sex base. He said they needed to be back before breakfast. Sima Guk panicked. Right now? Just the two of them? He begged Jian to reconsider. But Jian didn't care. That was why they had to strike first. He handed Sima Guk a knife and told him to lead the way. They arrived. Outside the little deity's sex base. Jian looked around. There were tons of guards. It had to be the place. Sima Guk whispered that he wasn't going to be any help. Jian nodded. His job was already done. Sima realized it. He just needed to bring Jian here. He asked how they'd get in. What was the plan? Jian gave a small smile, then raised his leg and kicked the front door wide open. He muttered to himself, "Let's do it like I did in my past life." Dan Wuzing had never backed away from a fight. Not when he was a hungry orphan. Not during his long years wandering the Jianghu. And not even after rising to the throne as the Fist King. Wherever he went, Dan Wuzing welcomed battles. He loved fighting more than anything else. Now, in his new life as Li Jian, he hadn't changed much. Jian walked through the gates of the little deity's sect without hiding. Calm, quiet, and fearless, he strolled right past the guards. In the middle of the courtyard, he asked out loud, where was the sect leader? One of the guards yelled at him, calling him crazy. Before the man could finish his sentence, Jian grabbed him by the neck and broke it. The body hit the ground. Jian warned the others not to make him repeat himself. Another guard cursed and stepped forward. He shouted, did Jian even know where he was? Did he think this was a joke? At that moment, Yom Jinsang, the leader of the little deity sect, stepped onto the balcony above. He asked what all the noise was. He looked down and saw Jian. He asked who the young man was. Jian said he was an assassin. He asked if Jinsang was the sect leader. Jinsang smirked. So what if he was? Inwardly, he thought this was strange. What kind of assassin walks through the front door? He narrowed his eyes, examining Jian's knuckles. They were thick with bruises and calluses. Those weren't the hands of a spoiled heir. He asked if Jian was the young master of the Yunham merchant group. Jian shrugged. So what if he was? Maybe he hid his face for nothing. Jinsang chuckled. He said he didn't expect someone so important to come to him first. Now that Jian had shown up on his own, he wasn't going to hold back. He'd take full advantage of it. A guard threw a net from above. Jian moved, dodging it with ease. He caught the net in midair. It reminded him of something. It had been a while since he fought against a group this large. He thought back to a battle in his past life. A fight against the demonic faction. Even though this body wasn't as strong as his old one, it was still enough. He gripped the net and whipped it around like a weapon. The guards fell, one after another. Jian smiled. It had been a long time since he had this kind of fun. The courtyard filled with screams. One guard stammered that Jian was fighting without even a weapon. Another whispered that he must be a monster. An arrow suddenly flew. It grazed Jian's face. His mask fell. Jian looked annoyed. Was the enemy just trying to show off? Jinsang raised his voice. He didn't want to use this weapon because it was expensive. But since Jian was a special guest, he'd make an exception. Some guards rushed forward, grabbing Jian's legs to hold him down. One of them trembled inside. If this kept up, he'd really die here. Jinsang asked, even with Jian's skills, could he dodge this? He ordered his men to fire. Dozens of crossbows launched spikes. Jian's eyes narrowed. He knew Jinsang didn't care if his own men got caught in the attack. Even someone from the underworld would hate that kind of betrayal. Just then, a voice shouted from outside. Sima Guk called out. He threw a dagger into the air. Jineon caught it. With one quick motion, he spun the blade and deflected every incoming spike. Everyone watching froze. Jin Song's face twisted in shock. He couldn't believe it. That dagger was cheap, and yet Jineon blocked everything with it. Jineon turned and gave Sima Gook a thumbs up. Then, without pause, he hurled the dagger at Jin Sang. It slashed his neck. Just a graze, a warning. Jineon said he didn't usually use swords, but he'd make an exception for Jin Sang. Jin Sang cursed inside. That crazy bastard. He shouted at his men. What were they standing around for? Shoot him already. Jineon replied coldly. He specialized in fists. With that, he launched forward. Jin Sang panicked. He grabbed Saran and used her as a shield. But Jineon didn't slow down. He twisted, moved behind them, and knocked Jin Sang away. Saran was unharmed. Jineon told her to move back. Jin Sang staggered. His thoughts raced. Who was this guy? If he was really the young master, then how could he fight like this? He looked more like a veteran killer than some merchant's son. Jineon stepped forward, asked what Jin Sang was staring at. Did he have something to say? Jin Sang begged. He had saved a lot of money. If Jineon spared him, he'd pay a huge reward. He wouldn't be stingy. Jineon responded with a kick to his face. He looked down at the fallen coins spilling from Jin Song's clothes, then asked why a man like him always valued money more than human life. He picked up a few coins, tossed them aside. He said he didn't need it. Jin Sang could keep it. Then, with no hesitation, Jineon drove his fist through Jin Song's chest, piercing his heart. Everything stopped. The room went silent. People stared, stunned. Jineon stood over the lifeless body. He muttered, disgusting.
Later, as the sun finally rose, Jin Aeon, Samagyuk, and the escort lady walked together after surviving a fierce battle. Samagyuk glanced at Jin Aeon and spoke with a hesitant tone, telling him that since Jin Aeon was heading in one direction while he was going the other way, he would escort the lady from there. Jin Aeon agreed and left her in his care. As Jin Aeon walked away, he waved at them. Samagyuk waved back while the escort lady bowed respectfully. As Samagyuk and the lady continued walking together, she suddenly broke the silence and addressed him. She asked if he was young Master Samagyuk. Samagyuk flinched at her words, stopped in his tracks, and removed his mask. He turned toward her and asked how she had known his identity. The lady smiled gently and explained that she had seen him many times in Danhyang. More importantly, since he was close friends with young Master Jin Aeon, it was obvious who he was. Samagyuk gave a small nod, saying he understood. The lady then bowed deeply in front of him and expressed her gratitude. She said that she was thankful for everything he had done that day, and promised that if he ever visited again, she would serve him a bottle of top-grade rice wine. Samagyuk scoffed at the offer, saying it was unnecessary since he had done nothing to deserve it, and added that he was not planning to visit the pleasure quarters anymore. The lady lifted her head, smiling warmly. She remarked that he had truly changed. Samagyuk fell silent for a moment before answering softly that he needed to change as well. As his eyes followed Jin Aeon walking far in the distance, he thought to himself that his friend had already changed so much, so he had to change too. Back at the estate, a table was filled with delicious food. The twins stared at the spread, clearly eager to eat. From behind them, Jin Aeon, who had just finished bathing, entered the room. He approached the table, sat down with them, and told them to eat comfortably. The twins nodded and replied respectfully. Jin Aeon encouraged them further, telling them not to hold back and to eat whenever they were hungry. The twins exchanged a glance, and then turned their focus back to him. Jinbo commented that the trading company was truly something else, while Myungbo asked if 7 meals a day would be allowed. Jin Aeon casually replied that of course it would be. One of the twins then noticed the wound on Jin Aeon's face and remarked that it seemed to have closed up, asking if he had been all right the previous night. Jin Aeon paused briefly before replying that he had managed, more or less. Inside, however, his thoughts were much heavier. He admitted to himself that even though it had been sudden, his core being shaken by a surprise like that never would have happened in his past life. If he was going to protect the merchant group himself and stand against magic users, he would need to grow much stronger. He knew it would take more than just training. He would need something beyond it. A voice then called from outside the room, announcing that a delivery had arrived for him. Jin Aeon looked surprised and asked if it was truly for him. An attendant entered, carrying several packages, and set them down as Jin Aeon inspected them. He admitted he had not been expecting anything. He opened one of the letters and began to read. It was from Gu Wong, who wrote that after they had parted ways, he had stopped by a tavern, had just a single drink, and then left. Gu Wong called it real progress. Jin Aeon scoffed as he read and commented sarcastically that such a thing was worthy of being recorded in martial history. He continued reading, and the letter explained that Gu Wong had also come to deliver something from Jin Aeon's father the day before, but had forgotten to hand it over. Jin Aeon slowly opened the box and continued to read the final lines, which said that Gu Wong would leave the item with him on his way home, and once Jin Aeon became stronger, he should help watch over their escort agency as well. Inside the box, Jin Aeon's eyes fell on a rare item. In his thoughts, he recognized it immediately. It was century root, and it looked like it had been aged for at least 400 or 500 years. If luck was on his side, it might allow him to raise his White Lightning 10-stage art to the 5th level. A faint smile touched his face as he realized this was what it meant to have a good friend. He then noticed another box waiting for him. Opening the letter attached, he read that it was from the Taeho Trading Company, a gift in honor of the long-standing trust between their families. Jin Aeon thought to himself that Taeho was one of the wealthiest firms in all of the Central Plains. He realized his father must have gone as far as to ask them for help. He admitted to himself that he had not expected so much thought and care. When he opened the box, his eyes widened in shock. Inside was pure void stone milk. He recognized it instantly. It was a miraculous elixir that most martial artists could only dream of obtaining. The only other treasures that could compare were 1,000-year spirit fruit, moon elixir flower, and 10,000-year snow ginseng, all impossibly rare. He confirmed to himself that this was indeed real, pure void stone milk. Even in his past life, he had only tasted a few drops of it. He wondered in astonishment how a mere merchant could obtain something that even powerful martial artists struggled to get their hands on. Jin Aeon then called out to the twins, instructing them to each take 1 century root. He told them he would begin circulating his qi and ordered them to guard his room, reminding them to eat only after he was finished. Jinbo looked at the root curiously and asked what it was. Jin Aeon explained that it was good for the body, rare, and not to be lost. Jinbo seemed unconvinced and opened a nearby door, revealing a storage room. He remarked that the merchant chief had stacked up piles of similar treasures just for Jin Aeon. For a moment, Jin Aeon stood stunned before thinking to himself that money truly was a powerful thing. 2 hours later, Jin Aeon sat in meditation after consuming the rare herbs. As the energy circulated through his body, he reflected that the taste was bitter and without aroma, much like martial arts training itself. The process was painful, and at first, it often seemed like nothing came of it. Suddenly, his body began heating up. He thought that if he were still the old Jin Aeon, his body would have melted down already. Thankfully, he had strengthened it beforehand. But then the pain became overwhelming, and it felt as though his body was on fire. The more he tried to suppress it, the more violently it raged inside him. He resolved that if that was the case, he would push even harder. An intense surge of energy burst out of him, shaking the room, until eventually it began to settle. When the calm finally returned, he tested his energy and clenched his fist with determination. He had reached the 5th stage. Still, he complained quietly to himself about the state of his body, noting that the toxins still reeked of alcohol. He muttered a farewell to the remnants of the old Jin Aeon and acknowledged that the real challenge was ahead of him. His gaze fell on the bottle of pure void stone milk. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and drank. He thought to himself that absorbing the elixir was like mixing water into sand, shaping it into a bowl, and tossing it into a furnace almost guaranteed to crack. But he believed that as long as he endured, he would emerge stronger than ever. Inside his mind, he felt the spiritual energy of the void stone milk coursing through him. He wondered if it was testing him and admitted that perhaps he had been greedy. Yet, he resolved that if he overcame it, he would grow even stronger than before. 7 days passed. At the estate, Hua Aeon stood outside Jin Aeon's quarters. It had been exactly a week since Jin Aeon began circulating his energy, and he admitted to himself that he was growing worried. The twins greeted him politely as he arrived, and he asked if there had been any sign of him. They shook their heads and explained that he had ordered them not to let anyone near. Hua Eon frowned but nodded, saying he understood, though he still expressed concern. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from within the room, and a violent gust of wind burst out, shaking the area. The twins quickly shielded Hua Eon from the force. Shocked, he demanded to know what was happening. All of them turned their eyes back toward the room and saw Jin Eon floating in the air. Hua Eon called out to him in disbelief, but his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. A foul stench then filled the air, forcing Hua Eon to cover his nose. His thoughts raced as he realized what it was. The smell was unmistakable qi deviation. As Jin Eon crashed to the floor, the twins and Hua Eon rushed inside, shouting his name. Hua Eon knelt beside him, begging him to come to his senses. But Jin Eon remained on his knees, gasping heavily for breath. Hua Eon approached Jin Eon with visible concern in his voice, asking softly if he was all right. Jin Eon slowly turned his gaze toward him, stood back up without saying a word, and walked toward the door. When Hua Eon called out again, demanding to know where he was going, Jin Eon finally responded in a low voice. He said it was unbearably hot, that he needed to cool off, and warned them not to follow him. Without hesitation, Jin Eon leapt outside, his figure soaring across the roof before vanishing beyond the estate wall. Left behind inside the chamber, the twins and Hua Eon exchanged uneasy glances. Hua Eon muttered to himself in confusion, noting that the weather was unusually cool that day. Yet Jin Eon had claimed he was burning up. As Jin Eon darted from rooftop to rooftop, his inner thoughts grew more frantic. His entire body felt as though it were aflame. The immature vessel of his current body could not harmonize with the overwhelming power raging inside him. It boiled uncontrollably, threatening to erupt at any moment. He knew that if he lost control here, the Yunha merchant group and perhaps even the entire street might collapse under the force of his power. He resolved to flee as far as possible, pushing his body forward with desperate leaps. Eventually, he reached a rocky mountain slope and finally came to a stop. Lightning energy surged uncontrollably through his body, crackling across his limbs. His inner voice trembled with urgency. He admitted to himself that he could no longer hold it in. Since he could not contain it, he decided he would release it. Raising his right arm high, Jin Eon roared, and a massive burst of lightning exploded outward from his body, striking the mountainside with blinding force. From a nearby ridge, several travelers froze in awe as they witnessed the impossible sight of lightning surging upward from the ground. Moments later, the skies opened and rain began to pour. In the middle of the storm, Jin Eon stood motionless, drenched in ragged clothes. His lips moved faintly as he counted, testing his ability. He muttered 6, then 7, and realized with satisfaction that he could release the energy to such a degree. His White Lightning 10-stage art had advanced to the 8th form. Later, in the city, heavy rain poured across the streets as Jin Eon walked calmly down the middle of the road. His clothing clung to his body in tatters, drawing confused stares. Passers-by whispered among themselves, wondering why a half-naked man was wandering the city in the downpour. Several women looked at him with wide eyes filled with desire. Jin Eon merely smiled faintly and thought to himself that he ought to buy some proper clothes. At a clothing shop, he chose an outfit and informed the vendor that he would take it, asking for the price. The vendor quickly shook his head and insisted there was no need to pay. Surprised, Jin Eon told him he must insist, but the vendor explained that ever since Jin Eon had taught a harsh lesson to the thugs of the Gu clan and the lesser immortal sect, trouble in the area had lessened greatly. He could now bring his children to the shop in peace. Being able to repay such a favor, he said, was a blessing. Jin Eon noticed 2 children peeking timidly from the side of the shop. The vendor urged him to take an umbrella as well since the rain was still heavy. The children stepped forward shyly and handed it to him. Jin Eon accepted with a gentle smile and told them he would gladly take it. As he stepped outside, opening the umbrella, the vendor and his children waved and called their goodbyes. Jin Eon continued down the busy streets, blending into the flow of people. His inner voice reflected on the peace around him. The area truly did feel calmer. He realized that he had never before paid attention to the aftermath of his battles, the way peace and safety returned once the violence was gone. Observing the people laughing, shopping, and enjoying themselves despite the storm, he closed his eyes and smiled. The feeling was not unpleasant, and he thought that perhaps he might even enjoy this rare, quiet walk. His reflection was interrupted by shouting nearby. Someone cried out for people to move aside and yelled for others to catch a fleeing man. Jinyeon's eyes followed the commotion, and he froze when he recognized the figure being chased. It was Cheol Myung-ho. The fugitive noticed him as well, stopped beside him, and grinned as though meeting an old friend. Cheol Myung-ho greeted him casually, remarking on how heavily the rain was falling. Jinyeon exhaled and told him bluntly that he certainly lived a hectic life. Meanwhile, at the Moyong clan estate, a private council of lords had gathered in the hall. Dokgo Myung remarked with satisfaction that it was good to see the council united again and praised Moyong Bin for preparing the meeting. Moyong Bin humbly replied that it was nothing. He then mentioned that he had heard of an unfortunate incident. According to rumors, Gu Yanghu had challenged one of the merchant heirs to a duel and had died. He asked if it was true. The head of the Gu family lowered his head in silence, giving no answer. The other council lords began murmuring among themselves. They commented that the Gu family had been among the most experienced warriors in the clan, and yet Gu Yanghu had made a fool of himself by causing a scene at the merchant guild and losing his life. Suddenly, loud laughter echoed throughout the hall. The boisterous voice belonged to Namgung Wu, the Blade Emperor. He jeered that being defeated by a mere merchant brat was more entertaining than any clown show. His laughter rang out as Gu Hyangsang trembled with anger at the humiliation. Dokgo Myung, caught between them, awkwardly agreed with the laughter. Finally, Gu Yangsang raised his head and declared coldly that Gu Yanghu had been practically disowned by their clan anyway. He added that he intended to make that merchant brat witness the true power of the Gu family. Back in the rain-soaked street, the pursuers chasing Cheol Myung-ho came to a halt in front of Jinyeon. One of them barked out a commanding order, demanding that he hand over the fugitive. They warned him not to stick his nose into business that did not concern him, unless he wanted to get hurt. Jinyeon turned slightly toward Myung-ho and asked who these men were. Myung-ho smirked bitterly and explained that they were underworld thugs who had been running rampant recently, calling themselves the Red Reaper Alliance. They had been trying to seize control of the entire region. He revealed that he had once run an auction business, but when he returned to settle the accounts, he discovered that the Alliance had already taken it over. To him, they were nothing more than a band of bandits. Jinyeon's gaze dropped to Myung-ho's hand, and he asked if it had fully healed. With a crooked smile, Myung-ho lifted both hands and admitted that it was still useless. Jinyeon then stepped forward, pointing at the bandits. He declared that since they were not locals, he would explain things to them in simple terms. He told them to come find him only when Cheol Myung-ho's hand had healed, and until then, they should get lost. The bandits erupted into mocking laughter, jeering at him. They asked if he had grown up sheltered, warning him that he clearly did not understand how things worked. They taunted him, pretending to dismiss his presence. But inside, unease spread through their ranks. An inexplicable sense of intimidation pressed down on them. One of the men, unable to control his temper, stepped forward. He shouted that Jin Aeon must want to die and raised his finger to point directly at him. His colleague tried to stop him, warning him not to act rashly, but the bandit ignored the advice. He sneered, asking if Jinyeon knew who he was speaking to and demanded to know who Jinyeon thought he was to order them around. Before he could finish his threat, Jin Aeon flicked his forehead with a sharp snap, sending the man flying backward. With a chilling tone, Jinyeon spoke slowly and clearly. He told them that he was so hungry at that moment. If they insisted on fighting, he might kill them all without hesitation. He advised them to leave while he was offering mercy, promising that they could meet again another time. Either Cheol Myung-ho would be there, or he himself would. The rest of the bandits immediately bowed in unison, their fear evident, and chorused that he should go safely. Jinyeon answered simply with a quiet acknowledgement. As the group retreated quickly into the rain, Myung-ho waved mockingly at their backs. He then turned to Jin Aeon, grinning, and demanded that he buy him food, claiming that he too was hungry. Noodles, he said, would be enough. As they began to walk together, Myung-ho continued speaking in his usual dramatic tone. He reminded Jin Aeon that on the day they had first met, it was not Jin Aeon's beating that had nearly killed him, but his hunger. He complained that since ancient times, people of the Central Plains had relied on food for their strength, and that Jin Aeon should have fed him before dealing with injuries. Jin Aeon sighed in annoyance and told him that he could have just asked instead of rambling so much, calling him a crazy bastard. Myung-ho laughed and declared that they should go to Jinpyeong Noodles. Later, at the restaurant, the two sat down to eat together. Myung-ho let out a satisfied sigh and said that he finally felt alive. He then commented on Jin Eon's appetite, teasing him by asking if he had established a beggar's sect inside his stomach. He remarked that Jin Eon used to nibble at food sparingly, but now ate ravenously. A person, he said, should not change so drastically, but should live naturally, flowing with life. Waving for the server, he ordered more food, raising his voice for 2 bowls, and then changing his mind to demand 4 more. He then shifted the conversation and asked about the twins. Jin Eon told him they were training. Myung-ho chuckled, guessing that they must have grown stronger by now, but complained that their food bill must be astronomical, calling them hungry demons. Jin Eon assured him that he had plenty of money. Myung-ho laughed and reminded him that he himself had also contributed. Then, with a sudden change of topic, he asked how one learned proper martial arts. Jin Eon tilted his head and asked why he was suddenly interested. Myung-ho leaned forward earnestly and explained that he wanted to know if he could face the Red Reaper himself if he trained. Jin Eon paused as he chewed his food and asked if Myung-ho wanted him to teach him. With mock humility, Myung-ho said that he would be grateful if Jin Eon agreed. Jin Eon asked if he would obey his teachings. Myung-ho puffed his chest and introduced himself again proudly as the Venom Fox, claiming that, of course he would. Jin Eon pointed to the floor and told him to bow. Myung-ho scratched the back of his head, embarrassed, and muttered that it was humiliating. But eventually, with a groan, he lowered himself to the floor and bowed, telling Jin Eon that he had better keep his word, or else he might just disgrace the Unha Merchant Group's main gate. Without a word, Jin Eon grabbed the umbrella beside him, swung it, and demonstrated a move before pointing at it. He told Myung-ho to follow the example. Myung-ho stared in disbelief and asked if that was all. Jin Eon replied flatly, asking what else he expected. Enraged, Myung-ho jumped to his feet and shouted that he had even bowed, threatening to make a mess in the restaurant if Jin Eon was not serious. Jin Eon struck him sharply on the head with the umbrella and ordered him to be quiet. He then instructed him to try holding the umbrella with one hand and repeat the motion he had shown him 100,000 times. Myung-ho gaped in shock, trembling. He stammered that not 1,000, not 10,000, but 100,000 repetitions were required. Jin Eon's gaze grew sharp as he told him that if the Venom Fox had truly grown such a long tongue, he should put the umbrella down and leave. Myung-ho asked in disbelief if he was serious. The atmosphere suddenly grew heavy. Jin Eon seized him by the collar and stared at him with narrowed eyes. In a low voice, he asked again if Myung-ho truly thought childish moves alone could kill someone. If he had swung that umbrella 100,000 times, he would have been able to kill half of those bandits with nothing more than a wooden sword. Instead, he had run like a soaked rat. Jin Eon's tone turned icy. He told him that if he wanted to live like a coward, he might as well die. Myung-ho was silent for a moment, then smirked faintly and muttered that he did not want to kill anyone. Jin Eon's gaze hardened further as he asked if he was a rat or the Venom Fox, warning him to know his place and stop flapping his mouth. The two sat in silence, the sound of the rain outside filling the quiet. They stared out the window, watching as people passed by on the wet streets. Eventually, the rain ceased, and sunlight broke through the clouds. Slowly, Myung-ho rose to his feet and asked to borrow the umbrella for a while. Without waiting for permission, he walked out of the restaurant. A servant approached Jin Eon and asked politely if he could cover his friend's bill as well. Jin Eon reached into his pocket, and the attendant smiled in gratitude. Left alone, Jin Eon thought to himself that now they would just have to wait and see if that fool Myung-ho could finally get himself together. He remembered Myung-ho's words about wanting to face the Red Reaper, the leader of the Alliance. Crossing his arms, Jin Eon murmured under his breath, "The Red Reaper Alliance." He had promised that he would come find them, and a promise was a promise. Elsewhere, inside a shadowed chamber, a man sat in front of 2 dead bodies while several of his followers knelt before him. Their heads bowed low, trembling with fear. None dared to meet his gaze. The man spoke with cold authority, demanding to know their excuse for letting Cheol Myung-ho slip away. They claimed they had almost captured him but had been stopped by one of Dok Jong-ho's friends. That friend, they explained in a shaking voice, was none other than the young master of the merchant group. One of the bandits stammered that it was true, insisting that Jin Eon's martial arts were terrifyingly strong. He added that word was already spreading that Jin Eon was being called the fiercest man in the entire Yanghua region. The man's eyes narrowed, his stare making the bandit flinch. In a chilling voice, he ordered his men to prepare. "Both Jin Eon and Cheol Myung-ho," he said, "must be tracked down and killed." Sometime later, Jin Aeon was training while conversing with one of the twins. The twin explained that Jiok-ye was notorious for his vicious temper, known to prefer tearing his enemies apart with his bare arms. He recounted how the leaders of the Blossom sect of Jangsan, the Dugard Guild, the Flood Dragon Guild, and the Crimson Treasure sect had all met their end at Jiok-ye's hands. Over time, Jiok-ye had absorbed several sects around Yukwan, amassing a massive force. His influence had grown so powerful that everyone in Yukwan now paid him tribute. Escort agencies, merchant guilds, inns, and even brothels were not spared. The twin added that even Cheol Myung-ho had been forced to offer him tribute. Jin Aeon remarked that he had heard Myung-ho had lost his entire auction house to Jiok-ye just the previous day. The twin agreed, saying that was exactly the kind of man Jiok-ye was. Jin Aeon sighed, admitting that Jiok-ye was a nuisance. If his own identity were discovered, things could become complicated. He concluded that he might need to make the first move. In Yukwan's bustling district stood Onjeongru, the house of warm affection. Inside, a lady ordered one of the attendants to check if the guests in a certain room had left. Moments later, a piercing scream echoed through the house. Startled, the lady rushed toward the source of the scream and demanded to know what had happened. One of the other women explained in a trembling voice that someone had entered Lord Jiok-ye's room and that Seol-i was still inside. Panic fell over the group. Another employee approached the lady, informing her that a new guest had arrived downstairs. The woman, Junghwa, decided to go greet the guest, instructing the others to take the shaken girl away and let her rest. She warned them never to disturb Lord Jiok-ye and to keep everything quiet. Downstairs, Junghwa approached the new guest with a smile. It was Jin Aeon. She introduced herself and began to give a polite explanation, but Jin Aeon cut her off abruptly, asking if Jiok-ye was there. Taken aback, Junghwa stammered, asking if he meant the guildmaster and whether he had an appointment with him. Jin Aeon answered coldly that he did not. He only wanted to know if Jiok-ye was upstairs. Junghwa hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the nearby bandits. Inwardly, she questioned whether she should reveal the truth to this stranger. After a moment of silence, she admitted that Jiok-ye was indeed there. Jin Aeon walked past her without hesitation, instructing her to evacuate the girls while he went upstairs. Junghwa began to understand what was happening, recalling that one of the girls was still inside Jiok-ye's room. She tried to warn Jin Aeon, explaining that the guildmaster was a rough-tempered man. But Jin Aeon only smiled and replied that he would manage. As Jin Aeon ascended the stairs, one of the bandits noticed him and barked out that he was not allowed to wander into that area. Jin Aeon continued walking casually, ignoring him. The bandit thrust his spear toward Jin Aeon, mocking him as if he had stuffed candy in his mouth. Without breaking stride, Jin Aeon seized the spear, swung it upward, and hurled the bandit crashing down to the first floor. The other bandits were instantly alarmed. They demanded to know if Jin Aeon even understood where he was and prepared to attack. Jin Aeon stood with his hands behind his back, his composure unwavering. In a cold and menacing tone, he asked which floor Jiok-ye was on. The bandits erupted in rage, swinging their weapons and shouting for his death. From the upper floors, hundreds of guards rushed down to confront him. Jin Aeon scoffed, his hand beginning to emit crackling lightning. He muttered that he would simply find Jiok-ye once he had torn through all the rooms. The first bandit charged, but Jin Aeon grabbed his head and announced that he would borrow his body for a moment. Slamming the man into the ground, Jin Aeon unleashed a lightning energy field that sent others flying. Another bandit swung a heavy flail at him, but Jin Aeon noticed instantly and dodged. He seized the weapon from the attacker and declared that he would take it too. With one devastating swing, he smashed the man's face and tore through a wall. Glancing at the damage, Jin Aeon muttered that it was not the right room. He leapt from the railing, spinning the flail and questioning whether he needed to smash through all the rooms. Without hesitation, he barreled forward, demolishing walls and striking down every bandit in his path. After ransacking the floor, he dropped the weapon and dusted off his hands, remarking that there was nothing there and that Jiok-ye must be on the next floor. Inside a chamber above, Jiok-ye was lounging on a bed when suddenly the door burst open. Two of his guards were hurled inside, broken and groaning. From the entrance, another bandit cried out in alarm, identifying Jin Aeon as the young master. Jin Aeon stepped in, smashing another bandit's head into the ground, and announced coldly that he had found his target. Jiok-ye grinned, realizing who the intruder was. He asked mockingly if Jin Aeon had come to pay Myung-ho's debt. Jin Aeon replied sternly that the 5th floor had been the right answer, though he thought the climb had been far too high. As the scene revealed the bodies of countless bandits strewn across the lower levels, Jiokye rose slowly to his feet. He sneered, asking if Jin Aeon had disliked the welcome party, and whether the climb had been difficult. Jin Aeon responded that it did not matter, climbing over others had always been his specialty. Jiokye towered over him, bending down to meet his eyes with a wide grin. He boasted that his own specialty was looking down on people from above. Straightening up, he slicked his hair back with a smile. Jin Aeon smirked inwardly, thinking to himself that he loved Black Path bastards like Jiokye, since they were always so fun to hit. His eyes flickered toward the bed, where he spotted the lifeless body of a hostess. Jiokye followed his gaze and grinned, explaining casually that it was nothing important. He simply could not hold back his strength, and he ordered the body to be dragged away. Jin Aeon's expression darkened. He muttered that Jiokye was beyond saving. His aura shifted violently as his killing intent flooded the chamber. In an icy tone, he asked how he should kill Jiokye. Jiokye only smirked, saying he liked those eyes. It was the same look he had seen in the people who once tried to kill him. But in the end, he boasted, they had all been torn apart by his hands. Outside, chaos erupted in the district as terrified employees and bandits fled the building. Screams filled the air. One man ran frantically, demanding to know what was happening. A bandit shouted back that some lunatic was tearing the entire brothel apart. A masked figure swung an umbrella in a slashing motion. He warned the panicked bandit to leave while he still could, then muttered a number under his breath. 2,874. The bandit froze in confusion, asking what he was talking about. The masked man swung the umbrella again, smashing it into the bandit's skull. Removing his mask, he revealed himself to be Cheol Myungho. Myungho growled that he had come to crush them one by one, cursing them all as sons of bitches. With each swing of the umbrella, he counted aloud. 2,875. 2,876. He complained that at this pace, he would never finish the 10,000 swings he had been tasked with. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the top of the brothel, shaking the entire district. Myungho froze, stammering in shock as he asked what in the world that noise had been. Meanwhile, at the top of the building, Jiokye was thrown off balance and sent flying through the air. Jin Aeon immediately followed from above, preparing an attack mid-air. He brought both hands down with immense force, smashing Jiokye all the way to the ground outside the brothel. Jin Aeon landed swiftly, his expression cold, as he stood surrounded by bandits. His eyes locked on Jiokye, who slowly pushed himself up from the ground. Jiokye dusted himself off, stood with a smirk, and remarked that the situation was becoming quite interesting. Without hesitation, Jin Aeon removed his outer clothes. Jiokye then ordered one of his men to hand him a weapon. A flail was quickly brought to him, which he swung wildly in preparation for combat. He declared that at the very least, Jin Aeon should be given a proper fight. As Jiokye swung the weapon, Jin Aeon leapt forward. The flail was launched at him, but Jin Aeon caught it effortlessly and pulled with overwhelming strength. Jiokye's eyes widened in shock as he struggled to resist. How can a mere merchant's young master match my strength? He thought. Determined to counter, he decided to release his grip and use the rebound force to crush Jin Aeon instead. He rushed forward with explosive speed, yelling at Jin Aeon to try blocking the next attack. Jin Aeon remained unimpressed. Observing his movements, he noted inwardly that Jiokye had trained in both meteor hammer and fist techniques. His motions were clean, betraying the teachings of a true orthodox martial artist. But Jin Aeon's expression hardened as he reminded himself that his opponent was not facing an ordinary man, he was facing the Fist King. Jin Aeon struck with a devastating punch directly into Jiokye's body. Jiokye groaned in pain and staggered back. Jin Aeon leapt backward, assessing him calmly. Jiokye, shaken yet defiant, laughed nervously. He admitted that Jin Aeon was skilled in fist techniques as well, and shouted that he would give him a proper fight. An immense surge of energy exploded from Jiokye's body, shredding his upper garments into dust. With rage, he hurled himself forward, appearing in front of Jin Aeon in an instant. He roared that he would tear him to pieces. But before he could strike, Jin Aeon's hand shot out, clamping firmly around Jiokye's neck. With a stern expression, Jin Aeon slammed Jiokye down into the ground, pinning him mercilessly. Sweat dripped down Jiokye's face as he clenched his teeth, horrified by the realization. Despite giving everything he had, he was being completely overwhelmed. Without warning, Jinyeon grabbed his face, his own body now crackling with lightning. He smirked and asked mockingly how it felt to be the one looking up from below. Pressing his knee firmly onto Jiokye's neck, he pinned him down harder. His voice dropped as he declared that if Jiokye had treated others with even a shred of decency, he would not be this furious. Jiokye only laughed, taunting him further. He jeered, asking if Jinyeon wanted a taste of Seoul as well. Jinyeon's expression darkened. He spoke coldly and announced the beginning of his punishment. Lightning surged violently through Jiokye's body, and his screams tore through the air. Jinyeon calmly raised his voice, counting as he elevated the power of his lightning. Second stage, third stage, fourth stage, fifth stage. The ground trembled as the surrounding bandits stared in terror. One of them stammered that they should stop this, their voices trembling with fear. Suddenly, one of them pointed upward, wide-eyed. Above them, a massive hand formed entirely from lightning loomed in the sky. White lightning 10-stage art. Jinyeon's voice thundered. Thunderclap. He lifted his arm high and brought it down. A colossal surge of energy descended, engulfing the entire brothel in blinding light. Bandits, employees, and civilians across the district froze in shock at the sight. When the energy subsided, Jiokye had been reduced to nothing but a black smear of ash on the ground. Jinyeon's gaze hardened as his inner voice declared that this was nothing less than the purge of the dark path. Raising his voice to address the trembling bandits around him, he demanded to know who they thought they were. Collecting tribute from the powerless, he asked them what they were supposed to represent. He fixed his glare on one of them and demanded to know why they were draining the lifeblood of ordinary people. His voice sharpened as he commanded them to answer, but no one spoke. The bandits stood frozen in fear, unable to reply. Jin Aeon's voice deepened with menace. He warned that if all they wanted was to flaunt their strength, then they should come to him first. He raised his voice in a commanding tone, declaring that he would make them end up just like Jiokye. One of the bandits tried to rally the others, shouting desperately that they should not be afraid. He cried out that it was only one man and ordered them to kill him. The crowd of bystanders watching began to murmur amongst themselves. Shock spread through them as the truth sank in. The infamous Red Reaper was dead. One of them muttered in awe, wondering aloud who that young man could possibly be. Another asked if this meant they would no longer have to pay tribute. Yet another worried that the young man might simply replace Jiokye and demand payment instead. Among the crowd stood Cheol Myungho, who calmly put his mask back on. In a steady voice, he told them not to worry. That young man was not the kind of person to demand tribute. The bystanders blinked in confusion, questioning his certainty. Cheol Myungho responded firmly, giving a decisive thumbs up. He repeated his words with conviction, saying once again that Jinyeon was not the kind of man who would exploit others. He explained that Jinyeon had wealth overflowing and had no need for such things. With that, Cheol Myungho continued to swing his umbrella in steady motions, counting each strike with determination. As he watched Jin Aeon slaughtering the remaining bandits, his thoughts grew firm. Every person, he mused, carried a spark within their heart, but nurturing that spark was each individual's responsibility. He understood now. Jin Aeon wanted to become stronger, strong enough to drive himself mad in pursuit of his power. Cheol Myungho remembered Jin Aeon's words echoing in his mind. Are you a rat or the venom fox? Know your place. His eyes widened as he suddenly shouted aloud, correcting himself with fierce conviction. No, wait. I am the venom fox.